Hello and welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charmley, and in this video I am continuing a series on local churches. The lockdown in England is on the verge of ending. Many of these historic churches have been closed for months and are now reopening, and they're beautiful buildings. They're vital parts of our heritage in this country. I would encourage you, if you're able to, go and visit, go and look at a place like this. It's a marvellous medieval church, St Bartholomew's, Blore. St Bartholomew was established most likely around about 1100, although there's almost certainly there was an earlier building on the site, so there has been worship here probably for over 1,000 years. We're close to Ilam, which was where Bertram, St Bertram, a Mercian prince, withdrew to be a hermit and to minister also to the peoples of the Moorlands. The dedication today is to St Bartholomew's, but it's believed that it may very well originally have been to St Bertram, who may very well have established the original church on this site. And you can see it's magnificent. It's rustic, it's got ivy growing up the walls, it's remarkably well maintained. Actually, I turned up and thought initially, because I looked at it from the wrong angle, oh dear, but no, it's a beautiful building, much loved and much maintained, and the ivy is a feature, not a bug, hopefully. But it's a building Norman. It's been added to over the centuries. You can see its present appearance is very 15th century. Those square-headed windows are typical of the 15th century. This area has long been the property of wealthy families, most notably the Bassett family, a family whose ancestors came over, as the saying is, with the Conqueror. And these worthy noble lords built up the parish, built up the church and maintained it. Today, of course, it's dependent very much upon the giving of a small congregation. Well, let us continue to have a look at the outside of the building. From this angle, this is from the south side, the traditional entrance side of the church. You can see it's a very typical Anglican, medieval English church. West tower, pinnacles, you see that little pyramidal thing, and the windows headed up to it. That is the stair turret which leads on to the roof, which would have been used as a watchtower, among other things. One of the things that was done was that at times of emergency there would be beacons that would be placed on church towers, so that to communicate, for example, the victory over the Spanish Armada or the potential invasion. The flat roofs, or relatively flat roofs, the low-pitched roofs, are again typical of the 15th century and demonstrate that there was a desire for this old Norman building to be conformed to changing architectural tastes. This is, of course, once again reminding ourselves of the Bassetts. This is a country house influenced church. There's a big house family, Blore Hall, and the big house family are very much responsible for the church. When we go inside, we'll see some of the features that they've left. You can see from here, in fact, that it is a broader building. It has a north aisle only, and the north aisle is full height and continues into the chancel area, giving what would have been a lady chapel. The aisle is, as is generally the case with buildings of this age, the aisle is a later addition. It didn't always have this aisle structure. In fact, you can see the stonework of the chancel changes when it comes to the Lady Chapel. It's no longer a Lady Chapel. It is used for something quite different. We come up the path here, you can just see over there, it's the old vicarage, now in private hands, it looks like. It's often the case with these old vicarages. They're massive buildings, many of them. They were designed for gentlemen with many servants, with big families, and they're just not they're not suitable for the modern situation. Here we have a monument to the Reverend William Bailiff, who died in 1836 and for 50 years was a rector of this parish. The fact he's buried here suggests he was also resident, so that would make it not an old vicarage but an old rectory. It suggests he was a resident, which wasn't always the case. Many rectors and vicars would be absentee and they would have a curate full-time to do the work for them. So here we are, we're about to go inside. When we talk about the old parish churches of England, this is the kind of building that usually comes to mind. It is extremely ancient. It's a country house church, to use the common expression. Country house churches tend to be quite smart. There's a big family, they need to have the monuments, space for monuments, and also big pews. And as we go round the interior of St Bartholomew's, we'll see some of the features. You can see behind me the two-decker pulpit. It's probably a lowered version of a three-decker. The three-deckers, the top deck is the pulpit proper where the sermon is preached from. The second deck is the reading desk from which the minister would read the prayers, would read the minister's part of the prayer book. And the third deck, which is not here, was for the parish clerk. The parish clerk would lead the people in the responses and also lead what singing there was if there was singing. And there usually was, it would usually be the Psalms. The Psalms in certainly the church as we see it today, it would have been the version by Tate and Brady, of which the best known of Tate and Brady's Psalm versions is "Through all the changing scenes of life, in trouble and in joy, the praises of my God will still my heart and tongue employ." The pulpit is 17th century rather, that is to say, it is of that period of the Puritans, that period, the classical period of the English church, both the Puritans and in fact for the anti-Puritans. So let's have a look around this ancient church and see some of its more interesting features. The Church of St Bartholomew, Blore Ray, to give it its full and formal name, is an excellent example, as we see it now, of a 15th century church with later post-Reformation alterations. The Norman core is represented only really by this thick wall here. You can see how thick the wall is by the door opening. But the windows have been changed. The arcading here is 14th century. There's a beautiful little organ over here, and let's have a look at this little organ. It is in grateful memory of Francis Appleby. It has been restored, but this is by Thomas S. Jones and Son, Upper Holloway, London. It looks either early 20th century or late 19th century. You can see here the box pews. Box pews are a wonderful thing. These benches in the centre are older. They look to be, in fact, pre-Reformation, 16th century, most likely. And typically of the period, they are big, solid chunks of oak. You can see the decorated bench ends here. But generally they are very plain with just a few decorated ends. They've been restored and renewed over the years, but the solid, rustic form remains. You can see some more benches there. In the 18th century, well, in the 17th century, 16th, 17th centuries, it becomes quite normal to have box pews, and these are for families, and with these benches would be for the ordinary folk, the poor folk, the peasants, and the farmers, the farm owners, and eventually the big house family. They would have their box pews, and each pew would be for a specific farm. You can see above those are where oil lamps would be placed. No gas here, of course, out in the country. The font is a rather uninteresting 19th century one. You will notice the screen here. The screen is not ancient by the look of it. There was an ancient screen here. We shall see elements of it. This is the pulpit. You can see it's the 16th century, the reading desk is later. There may have been a tester above it. You see the great church Bible there, and we proceed through the chancel arch, through the chancel screen, and you see here, this is where there would have been a screen. This is sawn off. They've been sawn off not quite at the same height, and you can see there would have been a screen within here in the 15th century. And the 15th century is very, very obvious here. The wood panelling, the choir stalls. The 17th century, by the look of it, rails. The rails are the balusters are that close to prevent dogs of any significant size getting through and causing trouble inside. And of course, in the Anglican tradition, the communion is received kneeling at the rails. Now, this is of most interesting. We have here medieval glass. Some of it is fragmentary, but very obvious. There is St. Anna teaching the Virgin Mary to read. There is a head of Christ with a crown of thorns, the head of probably Peter, the remains of a kneeling knight, some remains of inscriptions. And it reminds us that before the Reformation, many of the windows here, this is a wealthy church, it's a big church, the windows would have been decorated. Here we have a 19th century east window and a little communion table. We turn around and we look back and we can see here the choir stalls. The old screen forms the back of the stalls, and that's why it survived. And these are wonderful survivals with their bench ends, the carved bench ends, and there would have been a door through. We shall soon, and that's where the Lady Chapel would have been. We shall soon see why there's no Lady Chapel. There again you can see where the top of the screen has been removed and they've sawn it off, not quite straight, giving us sort of a good indication. Now this would be the big house pew, the biggest of the pews, box pews. They have their own doors, which is great for keeping unruly children under control. These look as though they've been cut down. They would have been higher originally. It's one of the reasons for the high pulpit, of course, so that the minister could see the people in the pews. We proceed again to the back, and you can see here the war memorial, those who made the sacrifice, and there are three of them: Private Higton, Private Moss, and Private Rowbottom. Captain H.E. Oakover. The Oakovers still live at Oakover Hall, and Oakover Church is basically now their private chapel, which is perfectly all right. And the Reverend M. Young, obviously chaplain, Lieutenant Young, who would, same family perhaps, the brother of the chaplain. Second Lieutenant C. Young, again probably the same family. And you have, of course, the officers first and then the privates. This being an inland location, you wouldn't have many, didn't have any joining the Royal Navy. Here again we have these pre-Reformation benches, and you can see how simple they are, just great chunks of oak joined together. There are some more modern benches here. Mary Ann Barlow, 6 years mistress of Swinscoe School, died September 6th, 1891, aged 29 years. Here again, they're the beauties of the interior with this simple lime wash. And what's that down in the Lady Chapel? It's the reason why there's no Lady Chapel anymore. Before we go down there, the ceilings. The ceilings. That again is a beautiful 15th century ceiling. Here we have another monument, another holder, more box pews. Again, farmers in the parish would have their own pews, again cut down by the look of things. The pulpit, which is central. You see we have an aisle here, and the pulpit is central to the central block of benches, so that people both in the nave and in the aisle can see. Although I think if you've got the end box pew, depending on your view of the vicar, or the rector rather, you were either unfortunate in that you couldn't see him all the time, or fortunate in that he couldn't see you sleeping, which did happen. You can see a slot cut there in the capital, and that would be for a screen that would have existed in the Middle Ages. Perhaps a chantry would have stood there. We proceed towards the Lady Chapel screen. This does look medieval to me. 15th century, very fine work. You can see here a squint. This would have allowed a priest here to see the elevation of the host in the chancel. There's the door that would have communicated between the two. So this suggests there was an altar here as well as in the Lady Chapel. There would have been many altars with many masses. Here we are again looking west towards the tower, and again that beautiful ceiling, beautiful 15th century roofs. More memorials to families of, well, here we have Sarah Ann Taylor of Colton, of course, the last place I visited today, the previous place I visited, and 1830 to 1885. But here is the great memorial to William Bassett, 17th century nobleman. Here lies a courtier soldier, handsome, good, witty, wise, valiant, and of pure blood. From William's conquest and his potent sword, in that same line many a noble lord that hath time lost in paying thus death's debt, as the unparalleled William Bassett. But thy high virtues with thy ancient name shall ever swell the cheeks of glorious fame. It's again very 17th century. This is, we proceed, we have this alabaster. Alabaster is native to this area, so alabaster tombs are perhaps less expensive than they would be if you were coming from another part of the country. I mean, look at the work here. We have the William Bassett in the middle, ladies either side, and in the centre we have William Bassett of Blore, who died in 1601. On our right, his left, is Elizabeth Howard. On his right, our left, is Elizabeth Bassett. Next is the Honourable Henry Howard and Dame Judith Corbett. And then these little cenotaphs, a little sarcophagi rather, these are to infant children. On our left, this one here is to the stillborn child of Elizabeth and Henry. And on this side, James Howard, another son who died in infancy. Elizabeth, and old William in the middle. They're in the line of the Cavendishes. Elizabeth married, first of all, the Honourable Henry Howard, and she is pictured here. Then she married Sir William Cavendish, who was created Knight of the Bath in 1610 at the age of 18, Viscount of Mansfield in 1620, Earl of Newcastle in 1628, and Duke of Newcastle in 1665. And what's interesting here, Dame Judith Corbett, you will see here, is wearing the fashions of an earlier age. She wears the ruff of the Elizabethan age, but here we have the fashions of the latter part of the middle, really, of the 17th century. There is a beautiful monument, a wonderful piece of alabaster work, and it quite fills the Lady Chapel. The Lady Chapel has no more room for images of Our Lady or anything else. Here we have Mr. Howard. Again, you see the older gentleman in the middle with his ruff, and the younger gentleman with his big, broad white collar. I think it's very interesting, this making sure that the fashions, and the armour, of course, again, armour by this point was a ceremonial thing. Knights, soldiers wore it not so much for battle, but in parade. There would be armour worn in battle if you were a horseman in particular, but this is a full suit of plate armour. They weren't really worn in battle by this point. But it's the sign of a knight. He is a very noble knight. They are very noble knights, and so they are attired. It's a marvellous piece of, I say, of alabaster work, and it quite fills the Lady Chapel, making it no longer a shrine to Our Lady, but a shrine to the Lord and his family. Yes, this is medieval work, this screen. I mean, look at that. A nice solid piece. Some medieval tile showing the floor would have been very ornamented back in the day. We look at the building today and it's quite simple. The walls are plain. The stained glass is mostly, like this stuff, armorial, and most of the windows are plain glass. But as we have seen from the survivals of the medieval period, it would have been a very colourful building back then, a building that gleamed with colour. And so we proceed back to the entrance, looking back at the memorial to William Bassett, and again above the ceiling from the 15th century. And so there we are, St. Bartholomew's Blore Ray. It is a spectacular church. It's one of the older and more atmospherically medieval, but really it feels very 17th century, 18th century. It's a medieval church, but no one's tried to make it look medieval again. Rather, it has all of the various things that have been added. It feels like a lived-in church, a church that is still very much part of the community. And I was very pleased to be able to get in, because last time I was here it was closed, it was locked up. And I'm very pleased to be able to get in to find it is so beautiful and so marvellous. I hope you enjoy this video, and these church tour videos, a great part of it is really to emphasise not only our Christian heritage in Britain, but to emphasise also that these places are open, and they're very much places where I find more and more people don't visit the old churches, and they should, because here we have the heritage, the history of our land in one building, from the Norman era through. There's a memorial little cross on the wall over here that, just move the camera slightly, if it's move the camera very slightly. Yes, there's a little cross on the wall here as a memorial to 2000, the second Christian, or the third Christian millennium has begun. And some people are very pessimistic about these things. I am not pessimistic or optimistic about man. Switch this round a bit. I am not optimistic about man, but I'm very optimistic about God. Our God knows what he is doing. And the gospel has gone forth here. And Christ is worshipped. This is not one of those high church places we've seen recently, a number of places where almost imitating Roman Catholicism. This is a Protestant Anglican church that feels very Protestant and very Anglican. The sort of place that, as a lad growing up in the C of E, I worshipped. I mean, our church was much simpler than this one. It had none of the, certainly didn't have this whacking great alabaster memorial. But here we have a place where over 1,000 years there has been Christian worship here, and long may it continue, and may it be Christian indeed as well as in word. Well, thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you. Amen.